Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Mastercast. I am joined by our very own Phil Squire, CEO of Consalia. My name is Will Squire, head of sales at Consalia. And on this episode, we are going to be exploring in more detail Phil's dissertation, because really the outcomes of Phil's dissertation has led us to where we're at today. And I think it's going to be really interesting to explore the themes and the interests and what sparked Phil's desire to get a doctorate. Phil, you're probably one of the only handful of people in the country, if not the world, with a doctorate in sales. How does that feel?
Well, I suppose you're in a sort of, it's a very much a minority group. And the encouraging news, of course, is that there are more and more doctorates in sales kind of emerging. But, there are a number based out in USA, which have got doctorates in sales. And I've met someone else in South Korea whose doctorate was on a sales related topic. So how does it feel? I don't know. Sort of slightly sort of marooned in an ocean out there as being one of the few people that have actually done a doctorate on the topic. But the great thing is that it's a situation slowly changing. Yeah. And it's quite exciting to be part of a growing movement of people who are taking an academic interest in sales. So from that point of view, it's been a privilege to be on that particular journey.
And just for the benefit of our listeners, what was the title of your dissertation?
Well, do you want the short title or do you want the long title?
Well, let's do the long title first, and then we can refer back to it in the short title.
Yeah, it's quite interesting one on titles, because I remember spending quite a bit of time with Peter Critton discussing the title, and he was very much the person that helped me get to the title at the end. But the long title is, how can a client-centric values approach to selling lead to the co-creation of a new global selling mindset? So I guess we've got the we've got the word client-centric, and much of the dissertation research was based on asking customers their points of view about salesmanship. The co-creation is that the process that was used to actually start to synthesize information was very much a collaboration between people inside Consalia, customers, as well as certain academics that I worked with as well. So that was the co-creation. I actually had a couple of really interesting mentors. I had a professor at Babson College who I had met at IMD doing a global account selling program, Professor David Hennessy, and also an author of a book on key account management. And I had Roger Scarlett Smith, who at the time was CEO of GSK's business. I think it was in Australia at the time. It was very much a sort of collaborative process, and so hence collaboration or co-creation. And it was global because the research took me all over the world. So I literally was doing my research from Asia right through to Mexico, and of course Europe and Central Europe. So the outputs of the research was based on information and data that came from very different parts of the world, and also many different sectors as well. So it sort of crossed, a huge number of sectors as well. So it was a fairly comprehensive number of interviews that took place that started to form the base data for the outputs of the research.
Before we kind of go into that level of detail, I'm sure we all now want to know what the short title is.
How do customers want to be sold to?
Yeah.
So that's the short title. I never forgave Peter for coming up with such a long title, because it was quite interesting when I was writing the dissertation. I was very much wanting to write it with an audience in mind who would be practicing sales professionals and not academics. I wanted it to be a dissertation that salespeople would pick up and could read, even though, of course, it was written to a doctorate level academic standard. But Peter did influence the title, so probably I put everyone off in the title, which is why I tend to shorten it when I talk to people about it.
Yeah, I think how do customers want to be sold to is something that I think anyone can understand pretty easily.
Yeah.
I guess well, what I'm really interested to know is what led you to kind of wanting to go down this path. Like, what sparked your interest in this topic?
Well, my interest was sparked as on the back of some consulting work that we were doing with, at the time it was Hewlett Packard, and they had asked me to go out and interview a number of their customers on that question of how do you want to be sold to. And I went with a video crew and interviewed just 3 of their customers at the time. And those interviews were really fascinating. Essentially what I was doing with the 3 interviews was, first of all, asking customers about the context of the world in which they operated in, what sort of challenges they faced. And then given the challenges they faced, I then went on to ask questions about how do they want to be sold to, given the sort of businesses you're in, the challenges that you face. And I got them to give me examples, actually live examples of things that salespeople did that they wanted to talk about, and talk about both in a negative sense as well as in a positive sense. And based on those interviews that I had, it was quite interesting because I could see that they themselves were really interested to answer these questions, which told me that customers cared about how salespeople sell to them. Of course, I was interested in the commentary that they made, which was mainly negative. And I remember after the very first interview I did, and we were literally, I'd finished the interview and I'd collected examples of good and poor practice. And I think it was Bob Frisell, who was the very first person that I interviewed, who was a CIO at IMS Health at the time. And he was walking out of the door, and I just asked the question, what percentage of salespeople sell in a way that you want? And he said, well, less than 10%. And I said, would you mind if I captured that on video? Because I think that, the HP community would be quite interested in that. And then I incorporated that question in all of the interviews that I did. I was very interested to get some sort of take on what was good and poor practice in their view, and then what percentage of salespeople sell in a way that customers wanted. So it was only 3 interviews, but 2 of the 3 interviewees gave me that same feedback, and the third didn't give me a percentage figure, but you could tell from the interview that there were not that many people that particularly impressed him in the way they sold. So I had this going on
It's quite a
in my mind.
damning indictment of the sales profession. Then, if your pool of 3 interviewees, only two of them echoed that only 10%.
Yes, it was, but at that time, you sort of don't know whether it was just luck because the sample size was very small. But there was what not concerned me, but it sort of impressed me was the emotion that was attached to the interviews. Both positive and negative. That they really cared. So I had this. Yeah, customers really care about the salesmanship. That's interesting. I had these data points that kind of, like you said, I don't know if it was a damning indication that there's major problems. It was a red alert, but it wasn't like the sample size was just too small. And that research that was not done as part of the doctorate was done at a time that by chance I met someone from Middlesex University who turned round to me and asked me a question at the end of a meeting, and he sort of suggested, why don't you do a doctorate, just out of the blue? And it caught me completely by surprise. And I'd not gone to university, and I'd not got an undergraduate or a postgraduate degree. And I told him that, and he said, well, it doesn't matter actually, as long as you can demonstrate you can think critically enough at doctorate level. And I would have thought you can, because you're the CEO of a company, and you must possess a certain intellect, to do the kind of job that you did. And it was really him suggesting that I might take this research and turn it into a doctorate that led me to this decision to do it. The research that I'd done, plus the chance meeting, and that's where it all started.
Wow. So, could you tell us, walk me through the next step? So you had this meeting with someone at Middlesex University who said, you can take this topic and make it into a doctorate. But did you realize at the time where this research was going to go? Or did you have any inkling to some of the kind of results that you found towards the end of your dissertation? How did you approach it?
No, I mean, I had no idea where the research would take me. In fact, my biggest preoccupation, and for a large part of the first year, was, could I do it? Could I research? Could I write? Could I, was I capable of actually doing a doctorate? And I remember when I was writing my, papers, to even get permission to do the doctorate, you had to go through certain hoops. Because I didn't have the past qualifications, I had to demonstrate, like I said earlier, that I had the skills of reflection to be able to do a doctorate. And I kept on getting my submissions with red lines through it. And the low point, I think I was running a workshop in Istanbul at the time for one of our clients, and I got my sort of third attempt at handing a piece of work in, and I got more lines through this than I did the first one. And I really thought, God, I just don't know if I can do this. And it sort of suddenly clicked when I had a conversation with my supervisor about what was going wrong. And they kept on writing in the margin of my submissions, but what do you think, Phil? But what do you think? Because I wasn't writing it, putting myself at the center of my inquiry. I was writing it in an academic style that I felt they were looking for, but was not what was required for the particular type of doctorate that I was doing. And but once I'd cracked the code of how to write, then I was set to go. I'd sort of that for me was a big moment where suddenly things became. I realized what I was doing wrong, and therefore I got over that hurdle of can I do it or not.
Yeah.
But so at the beginning, I was very much preoccupied with how to do the research, how to do the referencing, how to do the writing. And I had absolutely no idea what the outcome of the research would be. It was a question. I wanted to pursue this question about how do customers want to be sold to try and find why were so few salespeople selling in the 10%, level. And indeed, was that sample of 3 representative of a much larger sample of customers? So I had to go out and talk to a lot more people and get a lot more data in order to determine that statistically this was a fact, a truth, rather than a hypothesis.
Yeah. So, who did you interview, and were there any, apart from that initial kind of discussion you had that sparked your interest, were there any standout moments within those interviews that you had on your research journey?
I would say that every interview was really interesting, no matter who I interviewed, and so there was no one interview that I didn't enjoy. But the standout set of interviews that I did was probably going to Seattle and interviewing Starbucks on the one hand and Hewlett-Packard on the other about a particular creative deal that they'd done together. And to be able to get the sellers and the buyers involved in the interview process was amazing. And they were all very collaborative in sort of giving me input. But that for me was the data that we got from those sets of interviews really helped to shape the final outcomes of the research that was done. But that happened much later in the journey that I took. But no, you do meet characters when you're interviewing, and there were definitely some really interesting characters that I met, and people that have become friends or business acquaintances since those times. So yeah, it was a very formative process, just the interviewing, in building relationships and getting insights.
So how many people did you interview?
I think there were about 83 people in the end that formed the basis of the interviews that I did as part of the doctorate submission.
Yeah.
And they were all, a mixture of department heads, general managers, the C-suite, heads of procurement, really crossed every type of buyer. I mean, I was focused on the B2B market, and I was focused on perhaps the slightly larger acquisitions than commodity type selling processes. Though, we did interview people in retail, the FMCG market, as well as, people in manufacturing. I was quite lucky because HP were very interested in me going out and conducting these interviews, and they asked me to go around the world interviewing other customers from the initial 3 that I did. But I also had Tetra Pak, the manufacturing company based in Sweden, who had heard about the research, and they wanted me to do the same. And I also had Siemens mobile phones. So I had 3 quite major, if you like, sponsors of the research who were also part of the collaboration that took place with the outputs of the research. And that really sort of, I think, gave the whole research process a lot of credibility, because the sponsorship angle, plus the fact that they were very much part of the evolution of the ideas that came from it. It sort of helped the case, if you like, for the conclusions we came to.
Did they, that's really interesting. I just wonder if, could they have influenced your research in any way?
Well, it's interesting, this idea of, we talk about it, don't we, on our programs about bias, and they clearly were involved in selecting the customers that they wanted me to go and interview. So in that sense, they may have had a vested interest in knowing, what key accounts actually thought about them. They certainly didn't get involved in the detailed reflection that led to the emergence of the themes that came out at the end. So, and because it was so multicultural, there was no evidence of bias. I know during the early stages of me analyzing the data, I certainly realized that I wasn't looking at the data in the way that I should have done. And it was blocking my ability to be able to really listen to the research that was coming out, but in a deep way. And it's a very interesting, this idea of sort of putting yourself at the center of your inquiry, but at the same time wanting to be objective about the data that you have. It's very difficult to separate your own personal bias based on your own knowledge of a topic in the way that you start to write up your projects or form ideas. And I remember, a low moment in my doctorate was pulling together, I think after a couple of years, all the data and running a workshop with Professor Yip, who was at London Business School at the time, and sort of trying to make sense with buyers and sellers the data and coming up with a list of framework of competencies and skills. And I looked at this afterwards and I thought, well, has my 2 years sort of led me to this? Because there's absolutely nothing new here that we didn't know before. And that was the low moment in my journey
I can
to something else.
I can imagine, because you're trying to break new ground, and
I was still getting the 10%, by the way. 80% of everyone that I interviewed said that less than 10% of people sold in the way they wanted. So I'm still getting this message. I had that completely, collaborated by a large number of people. But yet, when we started to try and look at what are the sort of things that one needs to do with a sales organization to put them in the 10%, we were coming up with the same standard stuff. And I worried about it because it was an indictment of my own industry, which is sales training, that we are training people to become better sellers. And when we looked at this competency framework, I knew that that's what we were training people to do: question, listen, problem solve, price handle, and all of these things. And we talked about resilience and having a good CRM and prospecting. And I know billions of dollars go into training people in these topics. And I was still getting this 10% figure coming up, or time and time again. And so there was nothing new after 2 years. I'd reached a stone wall and thought, do I jack it in?
Yeah. So yeah, what changed?
What changed at that point? Well, it was a lecture that I attended run at Middlesex University by Jean McNiff, who is probably one of the world's thought leaders around how to do work-based learning. And one of the things that she asked me, sort of kind of out the blue, was a question about what my personal values were. And I remember sort of being shocked at the question, and I blabbered a bit and then said, well, it's family and integrity and all these things that you tend to sort of churn out when you're put on the spot. And she didn't say that what I was saying was bullshit or anything, but she suggested that I might want to reflect on that a bit more deeply, and I did. And that particular journey was so interesting because I took a really deep dive at my past, my upbringing, my work environment, to try and understand the values and belief systems that I had, which could cause me to have bias when I was looking at data. And so I went for a period of time after having done all of this research, questioning my filters, if you like, the filters through which I was looking at data. And I began to realize how glib I was in my answer to Jean, and began to understand that whole connection between how it is you look at information and also how you communicate and values systems. And so I thought that I would then start to look at the same data again, but with this lens of values. And I began to see incredibly clearly that when customers were talking about what they liked and disliked, they often used words that were more associated with values than they were with technique or process or whatever. They were talking about integrity and partnership and so on. And so once I had that Jean McNiff comment, it completely opened up a very new way of looking at the same data and came up with completely different conclusions. And that in itself, as a researcher, it's very exciting, quite an empowering and motivating process.
Yeah.
You suddenly get this big aha moment, and all of a sudden you can see lots of possibilities because you're looking at things through a very different lens. And I also researched people like Howard Gardner and Otto Scharmer, who wrote Theory U and as a approach to communications, and Howard Gardner, who'd written books on mindsets and values. And these two academic writers were quite influential in how I then started to shape my final sort of thesis, I guess. Otto Scharmer, because I understood that what he described in Theory U, which is where you go down one side of the U of going through a process of letting go ideas and preconceptions, and you're basically trying to get your head in a space that is without bias. And he is suggesting, as indeed happened to me, is that once you've done that, you can then have a mind that will let in new ideas and let come new ideas. So you let go and let come. And you go through different stages of maturity as you're going through the letting come phase, where you sort of sense something is going to be a new area to investigate, and then you shape it, and then it crystallizes into something that becomes incredibly concrete. And that's exactly what happened, to me when I did the dissertation and when I was doing the research. And the energy levels changed from being I'm about to jack it all in into a real enthusiasm. And we went through a process with some of the internal team, with Libby Drake, who is the head of our sort of learning design team in particular, and with Peter Critton, that I mentioned before, actually sort of going over the data and spending a lot of time looking at words and how those words would capture the values that customers either liked or didn't like in salespeople. And that was really enjoyable. And it took me into Latin and entomology and where do words come from? So I had quite a lot of fun just thinking carefully about words.
Yeah.
And Peter was helpful then because he was a Latin scholar, and he knew where a lot of these words originated from, and I quite enjoyed that process.
Guys, well, it sounds like it was a real journey, if you like, and actually, I guess when you'd initially reached that point where you had all of the data and nothing new was coming from it, it sounded like you went through your own personal reflection cycle.
Oh, it did. Yeah. I mean, it was, you look at everything. You look at your childhood, you look at your early employment, you look at your marriage, you look at your family, you look at everything, and you sort of distill that. I mean, I did. What I found interesting about that process was looking at a pivotal event and using that pivotal event to reflect on how you reacted and how you felt at the time. And that for me was the truest form of identifying values. Not selecting values off a page, but actually going back to things that have happened in your life that you can then kind of describe positively or negatively. I'd say negatively, sort of values that you don't particularly like or values that you do like. And so I found that incredibly interesting. And sometimes that conversation that you have with yourself is uncomfortable, because you are really sort of digging quite deep. But I felt, irrespective of the outputs of the doctorate, that process in itself was incredibly helpful, because you could better understand yourself and therefore how you are going to act or react once you'd defined what your core values were at the time.
So is that the sort of, is the realization, therefore, it's really important to understand your own values in order to make sense of particular situations, or interpreting the data in this kind of case? Because it sounds like you had like this intrinsic look at yourself and you've identified your own values, but then it kind of manifested itself in how, in the case of your doctorate, how you would then process and interrogate the data in a new way. I find that link is really interesting, and so, yeah, I guess if you could comment on that, but then also, is it possible or not to try and make sense of data without actually, first of all, understanding your own self and your own values?
Right. So there are a number of, I think, questions in there that you've kind of asked. There are a couple of things that I began to get interested in. One is the the predictive nature, the prediction that you can have once you understand values. Because when you have a pivotal event that's happened, you don't have time to think often. You have to act instinctively in the best way you can. And the way that you do that is going to be driven by circumstance and what your core values are in many cases. So I was interested in making this connection between predictable behavior. Yeah, that was, and then of course it was the, if we're getting behavior that customers are saying they like and not like, it then led to the question, well, what's the value that then drives that behavior? So that's how these things sort of came together. And what made the whole thing sort of quite easy was the fact that customers were often quite explicit in what values they wanted, even though I wasn't looking at the time for that, that connection. So I would say that unless you go through the kind of process that I went through, one could hold to question the objectivity of any research that you do because you haven't fully understood your potential bias in the way you look at data.
Well, that's really, really fascinating. So then you've analyzed the data following your interviews with a new lens, should we say, for want of better words. Sort of what were some of the key results that came from the research?
Well, we went through a process of looking at trying to codify, what the negative values were that customers frequently saw, and codified positive values. And the first bit of getting to what became a set of 4 negative and 4 positive values were I think we started off with, I can't remember how many. We sort of like 8 or 9 negative and 8 or 9 positive, and we constantly came back to the list, and we said, is that really the right word? Does that really capture it? For example, one of the words, and it's in the title of the academic version of the dissertation around collaboration, was we actually wondered whether collaboration was a core value that should be very explicitly stated. We looked at words like integrity, and is that the core word, or is it authenticity? We spent a lot of time looking at, well, if you had if you had a word like client centricity as one of the core values, then if you were really client centric, wouldn't you therefore be collaborative? Yeah. So we spent a lot of time going over the list, and right up to me writing my final dissertation, I was still playing with it because I wasn't quite sure that was the list. And of course, I was testing the positive and negative mindset conclusions with the clients, saying, look, I remember sitting down with HP and saying, look, this isn't quite what I had thought I'd come out with the research, but it seems to me that these 4 value stroke mindsets, and I use those words interchangeably, seem to be negative ones driving clients to say that they don't like salespeople or sales approaches. And then we had these set of 4 that were positive. What do you think? And I remember at HP, it took them 30 seconds to say, that's exactly how we need our salespeople to sell. If we know that they have these mindsets, then just intuitively at the time, they felt that this was going to lead to good results. And so, the we started off with defining the negative values as being manipulative, supplier-centric, complacent, and arrogant, overt arrogance, as we called it. And then we had positive mindsets being around authenticity, client centricity, proactive creativity, and tactful audacity. And I just want to come back to, you asked me a question earlier on about which interviews did I find the most interesting. And it was when I went back to that Starbucks case study, that was where a lot of those words came together in that case study, both on the sell side and the buy side. And that's why I sort of mentioned those set of interviews had a hugely influential role to play in the final conclusions. But when I came back, having defined them, the question then became, so what? Nice words, but yes, we've got the customer story, but how do we operationalize that? How do we test the theory? And that then led us on to an incredible journey, working again with HP's sales organization in Western Europe, selling large, complex deals. And we had 2 control groups, and we created a training program designed to equip everybody working on these large deals with an attitude of mind, if you like, an approach that was underpinned by these 4 mindsets. We looked at a huge amount of detail at every single stage of the sales cycle. And we challenged with the teams that were working on these deals, how can we go beyond what we would normally do against these mindsets? And how do we provide evidence that we're actually living these values? From the moment we may receive an RFP to the moment we present and negotiate, right through the cycle. And it was an incredible journey, because I was working with highly intelligent, bright people across Western Europe, and working on these large deals, and then tracking the performance of those deals over a period of time. And at the same time, comparing those results with the other half of the European sales force that was focusing on Central and Eastern Europe at the time, both with similar market opportunities. And that gave us a huge amount of insight into the kind of tools that we could provide these teams that would enable them to easily and simply adopt the mindsets. And we found that quite interesting. First of all, the beauty about the mindsets is it's not a complicated methodology. It's very simple to follow, and it's very situational. So whether you're in a negotiation or whether you are wanting to pitch to someone you haven't pitched to before, you can think of the mindsets, and you can think, well, how can I live these mindsets in this particular call? So what was interesting was approaching sales performance from the lens of mindset, as opposed to a technique or a methodology or a trick or something else, which has typically been the domain of sales training up until this point in time. It was a very different approach, just based on how you thought and acted. The results were amazing. We sort of transform. I say we because they were the players, the actors, if you like. I was simply there as a coach, sort of encouraging them along the way and observing how they were doing, and writing it up as part of my research findings. And the conversions went from 1 in 15 to, I think it was 73% conversion rates on these large deals. Market share went from something like 0.1% to 7%, I think it was, over a 2.5 year period. The value of the deals was around, I think it was 4 billion or something. It was a huge amount of success. And it was exciting because there was a new culture being formed. There was a new language being formed in these teams. No one could quite get inside the organization quite how successful they were. They were, often, they were saying, well, was it about price? Just putting prices down led you, it wasn't, it wasn't to do with price, but it got up to Carly Fiorini, who was the CEO of HP at the time. We had articles published in magazines on the success rate, and then that gave us the evidence that we wanted, that there was a complete connection between mindsets and sales performance.
Wow, it's just quite phenomenal. So
yeah, it was.
So where does that kind of lead us to today?
Well, it's interesting because, whilst the research was conducted all those years ago, I finished my dissertation in 2009. We have evolved, and we're working across many different clients since then in many different parts of the world, and the research, if you like, the data still continues. We're still asking customers the question, how do you want to be sold to? We're still distilling that data, and we've developed more sophisticated tools now to be able to sort of analyze mindsets and get customer feedback. And so I think where does it lead to? It provides, I think, the sales profession with another layer of capability. You need to be competent, and you need to be skilled, and you need to be good at listening and questioning. All of those things are still relevant. But where my research addresses, and this is borne out with the academic research I've done on the topic as well, is it's the first piece of research that's ever been done on the topic of values and mindsets to this degree. No other academic has researched the topic as we've done, and I believe the sales profession has, or the academic community, have kind of not yet fully embraced it in a way from a research angle. So I think, where could it go? Well, more research, more ideas. Are the values still relevant today in this world in which we live in? Compared to, do we need to add new words? I mean, I guess there will be people who will take this framework that we've created and shape it and tweak it and explore it from different angles. But at the moment, there's been no pushback. Even since 2009, the words tactful audacity and proactive creativity and client centricity and authenticity still stand very strong. I think the other thing that's interesting when you take this concept around the world is that because it doesn't address behavior and competence, the words seem to fit with very different cultures. So whether you're in Japan or Korea or Europe or the Latin Americas, the framework of values and mindsets allows people to use their cultural context and apply it as they see fit. So it's very universal, approaching this from a values perspective. But where will it go? I don't know. I think that I'll let someone else figure that out. But it sort of started a train of thought on a topic, and it'd be interesting to see if the academic community pick this up and start to do their own, sort of research. A few might have done, but not many.
And could you shed more light, I guess, on how if anyone's listening to this podcast and they're thinking, oh, well, we would like a 4 billion incremental increase in revenue based on the mindset intervention. How have you subsequently engaged with customers, leveraging the use of the mindsets?
We've done it in sort of different levels. I mean, you've got you can approach it from a cultural level and what drives the right culture, and how to embed a culture such that the sales organization lives those mindsets. And so that's a management kind of initiative. So there are all sorts of things that one can do at a management level when you're looking at how to set vision for your sales team and how to coach, around the mindsets. And of course, we've got a lot of experience now of helping with development programs, organizations explore that from a leadership point of view. And of course, from a selling point of view, it's the same. It's how do you embed the values and mindsets that customers want in a mindset of the sales force? And of course, we're able to do that because of the research is so compelling. It often starts with actually interviewing their customers first and getting them to listen to their customers and them seeing it through the lens of mindsets and values, that they begin to really appreciate that this is hugely important. But very few salespeople, in my experience, have actually seriously questioned what are the values and mindsets that they have that underpin the way they sell. And I think that, the sales mindset survey tool that we have that's available on the website, freely available on the website, is not a bad starting point, for reflecting on it. So yeah, there are many initiatives that can be taken to help build a culture that is based on a values-driven approach, which of course, we have a lot of experience in, and anyone could, sort of reach out to us and ask us questions about it. But and also, speak to our customers about it.
Yeah. Great. So I guess the big question is, if you were going to do another dissertation, would you would you do something on a similar topic? Would you do it again?
I don't know if I'd do this one again, actually, but I think that if we start to look to the future and look at the context of the world in which we live, I'm definitely interested in the whole area of, and I've talked about it earlier, sort of predictability of performance. And I think now we're in a data-driven world, and the connection between data and behavior, I think, is really interesting. And I think that a new frontier, if you like, though it's not one that I would pursue right now, because I think it's for other people to take this up. But if I were doing my doctorate again, I would probably do it around the whole idea of predictability.
I think what you were saying earlier around your own values and how your values influence the way you kind of process data is also quite interesting, because there might be unconscious biases in the tools that we're using today in order to predict for future trends and predictive analytics, because no one views it through the lens of actually understanding your own values first. That could be a good one for your next.
It could be. Yeah, it could be. Yes, it's very difficult to be totally objective when you've got a particular sort of train of thought that you've spent so much time thinking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I suppose the question is it a universal truth? Yeah. That values drive actions. actions are behavior, or not.
Well, if anyone's listening to this has the answer, please let us know.
You got out of that one very well, Will.
Great. Well, Phil, thank you so much. It's been really fascinating to hear about the story of your doctorate. It certainly sounds like it was a journey, and it's still having an impact on so many people today. So as a student, as someone who's working in Consalia as well, thank you. And I think you've really pushed sales as a profession to the next step through your dissertation.
Well, thank you very much, Will.